You are watching Freedom Talk on Libertarian World with Keith Komar, and today's guest is Gene Balfour. I have Gene Balfour on call right now. How are you doing, Gene?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
That's good.
Life's good out here in the country.
Are you guys enjoying your time alone to reflect right now?
You know, the thing is that we live in the country, we're away from everything, so there's very little change in our life, virtually nothing. The only thing my wife just said shopping is the only thing that's probably a hang up, but everything else is almost exactly the same. We walk our dogs, we do our exercise, we enjoy the country, we do our chores,
Sure.
Normal things, nothing changes.
That's right. And so the major effect that you would think is in the big cities where the people who are commuting and doing all these other things, they're really feeling the pinch on this right now.
Exactly. No, I would agree with that for sure. And I have relatives still in the city as well, and they tell me the stories that they're experiencing, and of course their stories are very different than mine. So we feel pretty blessed to be up here,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Elkona, so I'm kind of out of the. I kind of have the best of both worlds. I'm 20 minutes from Barrie, so if I want the city, I can go. But where I live right now, I'm like 3 minutes from the lake by shoe, and
Right.
I can go do my own, do my own fishing and all that. So it's nice, and I agree with you that the people who are already living a little more simple of a life are not as affected as much by this as the people who are living in the hustle and bustle.
Exactly.
And especially say those folks up in Sudbury area who are only paying maybe $800-900 a month for rent.
Yeah.
They're quite comfortable with their $2,000 handout from Trudeau because they can pay their bills and sit at home. But a guy in Toronto who's paying $2,600 or $3,300 a month for his mortgage and he's at home, he's got a whole different perspective, right?
And we see that here in the city of Kawartha Lakes because it's a fairly poor population here. There's not a lot of heavy industry anymore. There's a lot of people at minimum wage or slightly above. There's also a lot of older people too, so they're mostly living on retirement. And so it's not a high income area at all. Cost of housing, of course, and anything to do with cost of living these days has been jacked up because of our governments over the years. But I find a lot of people around here suffer as much as anybody would in Toronto just because they don't have the same income as you get in Toronto, but they still face proportionately the same cost of living.
For sure.
It's much harder for them. The fortunate thing for Cynthia and I is we're both retired. So for us, we're even out of the workforce. We don't have to worry about any of that either. We have incomes coming in from our retirement savings. And so life is, for us, life is perfect timing for this thing to happen, but not for my daughters and anybody else for that matter who's still working,
Have you seen a hit on your retirement savings? Have you seen any type of deflation to it because of the market and things moving around, or are your savings still pretty secure?
Well, I have an investment manager that I've used for a number of years, and I had a meeting with him about 2 weeks ago, and there's been about a 10% hit on my portfolio, but the way he has set it up and the way I advised him at the time was I said, I'm not worried about making a lot of money in my investments, I'm more worried about protecting what I have. So he set up a highly protected platform for me or portfolio for me, and 10% hit in this kind of environment is not terrible compared to other people. And there's certainly enough there for us to be okay. We're not going to have to worry about anything. So from that point of view, we have no worries at all.
Good. That's good to hear, and that's good economic advice for people out there. Is that searching for that fast dollar in the market is great and fine until you lose it all, and it's really easy in a volatile market to, have some big wins and then just take one big hit and wipe the slate clean. So if you're in it for the long term, make sure that the people out there who are investing be safe with your money and make sure that you're not searching for that quick golden rung, right?
It's funny how I have two daughters and they're very different people. And my oldest daughter is a pharmacist and she's very, very frugal with her money. So she lives in the States. She works in a hospital in the States. She's making six figures at the age of 34. So she's doing fabulous. But she probably saves, I would say, a third of her income. She has no debt whatsoever. And that's the way I was at her age. I was somebody who lived very, very frugally, put aside money. I knew one day I'd retire and I'd want to get there. So I never was a person that borrowed money to live. I never, ever did that. And yet I know today in the Canadian population that the average family is carrying something like 170% debt to their annual income. And I don't know how they do that. I couldn't sleep at night like that. I couldn't at all. And so if I was talking to young people today, and I'm very proud of my daughter Paris for living like that. Living frugally is a very wise way to live, I think, while she's still building her career and building her savings for the future. But I see other young people that they have the fancy cars and they live way beyond their means. And now I would imagine that they're in a corner. You know, they lose their jobs, they have no income, they have debt coming out of their ears. You know, I know a few of them have moved back with their parents because they can't sustain themselves. You know,
that's right.
Sad.
It really is, and it's government is always a reflection of the populace. And so if people are going to be living well within their means, then it's nothing for the government to do the same, because one is a reflection of the other. So I think what we see in our bloated government is just a mirror of, you know, spend, borrow, don't worry about it. Tomorrow is another day. And we need to really, really, especially when you see something like this go down, we need to re-examine those type of thoughts.
But that's all because they're Keynesian people. They're followers of Keynesian economics in Ottawa. And you know, John Maynard Keynes believed that the primary player in any economy of the three major players is the government itself. It should be centrally planned. It should manage money. And so they decided long ago that we should be debt financing. And so they made it highly attractive for people to borrow money at very, very low interest rates so they could leverage themselves to the eyeballs, you know. And at the same time, for people who want to save, if you want to put money in a savings account or even a RIF or anything else, the return on investment is actually worse than the tax rate plus the inflation rate. You're actually losing money when you do that, unless you get really lucky. So they've engineered this. They've engineered this crisis for probably 2 generations, and now it's coming home to roost. And I guess they never expected there'd be a pandemic, but here it is. And I think they're going to be paying for their sins, and so are we, you know.
Well, sure we are. And at the end of the day, it's fine and good to have the altruistic feeling of you want to protect everybody in society and you don't want to see any unnecessary death. But you really have to weigh that balance out, and you really have to look deeply at what are you going to cause by running and hiding and everybody locking down. And also another thing that is being missed in this whole conversation is that herd immunity is a 2.5 million year old solution to mankind's way of dealing with viruses. We all get it. Some of us die off. The weaker ones, the ones with problems, pass on. Stronger immune systems live on, and we develop and adapt to these things. And even the thought of a vaccine itself is to advance herd immunity rapidly. Everybody gets a weaker piece of that. So when I hear Dr. Tam saying now that herd immunity is not the solution, but the vaccine is, it's a contradiction in her own sentence right there. What she's saying is that natural herd immunity is not going to be accepted, but we're going to inject you with herd immunity in your arm.
Yeah.
So there's this really weird conversation going on where people don't really understand enough. I think I heard a saying really very recently the most dangerous person is someone who knows enough to think they're right, but not enough to realize that they're not.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly right.
There's that middle ground where you know too much for your own good, but not enough to actually come up to the correct answer at the end of the day.
And I think you're right that Dr. Tam, here she is speaking out against 200,000 years of herd immunity, natural herd immunity, as saying it's not acceptable. Who is she to say that to the population of Canada when it's been going on for as long as God made little apples, you know?
It's what saved us in every other pandemic through history, and so we took a hit in some of them. You know, we lost 30% of humanity in the 1400s, but here we are. We adapt and we survive and we thrive. So, and anybody who's listening to Dr. Tam, I want to point out to them that she was the one who said that this isn't going to spread. It's not communicable. She's the one who said that don't wear masks. She's the one who said that transport is fine. You might see the odd case pop up. All the way down the line, she has been 100% wrong. So what makes her right all of a sudden now where she's been wrong all the way? And you have to listen to the evidence, and you have to really pay attention now. Now is not the time to steal sound bites off of CBC and think that is the 100% truth. Now is the time to dig in, do your research. We're all at home anyways. take the time and educate yourself into what's actually happening, because
Yes.
you and I know, the virus might not have been engineered for the purpose that they're moving on with,
Right.
but at the end of the day, they're using it to advance that narrative of globalization, one world government,
Yeah.
one digital currency. I've heard talking to now about digital certificates for people to be mandatory vaccinated. And
Yeah.
there's, this whole agenda that's being rolled out. And I'm not saying that someone engineered this virus to make that happen, but it's a very convenient chance for them to use this as that,
Yeah.
to advance that.
Well, my wife and I were talking about this about an hour ago. There is a laboratory that's about a kilometer away from the Wuhan food market where the first epidemic broke out. And this laboratory is a laboratory that was doing research on trying to recreate a coronavirus. And the reason why they do that, from one of the YouTube videos I watched, is that they try to recreate it so that they can study it and then try to figure out ways of breaking it. And so it's a valid reason to recreate a virus under the right conditions. But I can just imagine that maybe what happened there is that maybe the researchers accidentally got infected, and maybe they went shopping that day at the food market and passed it on to a number of people that she saw in the food market, and that's where it got started from. It didn't come from a bat virus. It didn't come from anywhere else. It probably came from somebody monkeying around in a lab and accidentally walking out. Well, I don't want to use the word monkeying around. They're doing legitimate research.
Sure.
Walking out and passing it on unknowingly. But even that, the things I'm seeing now is that they're thinking that the virus has probably been out there much longer than they originally thought. There were people like Cynthia, my wife. Cynthia was sick with unusual symptoms in late January. And I remember her coming out and saying, this feels unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And she had all the symptoms of COVID that now that we understand them, we went back and looked at it. And so I'm thinking, and she's thinking, that she probably had COVID, didn't know it, recovered from it. I'm with her, obviously, so I might have been exposed, and
sure.
I felt kind of a little off for a couple of days, but it didn't really hit me. One of the guys that I play hockey with, Mark, I had a hockey game with him on March the 10th, and then we went out for beer and wings afterwards. And then 3 days later, he went to play hockey again on the Friday. And the goaltender is the same guy he's a doctor, and he's the same guy that was treating the patients at Pinecrest in Bobcaygeon. And so he got it from the people in Pinecrest. And so the doctor had to call up the entire hockey guys from that Friday event to say, you've been exposed, you better be tested. So Mark discovered that he was sick with it. He went home for 14 days. He recovered from it. His wife didn't get sick either, and it wasn't as serious. Like, he had more or less flu symptoms, cold and flu-like symptoms, and that was it. So, but I don't know if you've seen the most recent YouTube video, and if you haven't, I got to send this to you. It came out yesterday. It's two research scientists, one's a research scientist, one's a medical doctor. They run as part of a hospital and clinic chain in California, and they've been doing their own research study. And this is 50 minutes long, but man, is this good. This guy is really identifying the fact that the incidence of death from COVID-19 is much lower than anybody ever expected. Because now that they've done enough testing, they're beginning to realize just how broad this thing has been spreading in the communities across America. They tested, I think it was 13,000 people, some number like that. And out of that 13,000, they discovered that 20% of the people tested had COVID. 20%. That's a long way towards herd immunity.
Sure it is, and it's a huge number compared to the numbers that the media is throwing at you, which is confirmed cases versus confirmed deaths.
Exactly.
And so that presents you with like a 4 to 6% death rate, right?
Yep.
Not everybody's being tested. Not everybody's out there who has it is ever going to be tested. And yet anybody who's dead in the hospital that showed even signs of having COVID without being tested are being marked as dying from this. And that is just a huge, terrible way to do science. It's very akin to the way they've been doing climate science in the last few years, where they make these models of worst case scenarios and they throw it out there to scare the public. Yeah. And I really believe that if you look at the history and how the conversation has changed in the last 2 or 3 years with climate change, and how people are like ready to stop burning oil in a country of Canada where you're going to freeze to death to
Yeah.
to change the environment. I think we're seeing exactly the same thing. And I think the powers that be have been watching this and going, now's our chance. This is our chance
Yes.
to roll this out, because we have people right in the wheelhouse of media and disinformation. And we're
Yes.
starting to see that happen across this country, where anybody who even speaks up against the draconian measures that the government is rolling out, you are considered a conspiracy theorist, you are considered a
Yeah.
fool, an idiot. I've been told numerous times recently on Facebook that I should get COVID and die. I laugh and I say, well, I'm 48 with no comorbidities, so I'm pretty sure that this isn't going to kill me.
That's
But
right.
maybe I can
Yeah.
get it and help build herd immunity. But it's a foolish conversation, because people are just they're so wrapped up in what they see in media nowadays, without having any type of independent thought to it.
Yeah.
That they're just and it's scary to see the like
Yeah.
and you have been a part of the liberty movement for a long time. I'm
Yeah.
fairly new. I'm only about 5 or 6 years into this movement, but I've seen a change really happen, and we're pushing full on left, communist.
Yeah.
Even if you want to talk, this is a lot more like fascism. This looks a lot like Germany did in the 30s, where Trudeau has made these grabs for power. It's the same thing Hitler did in 1933 when he took over the chancellorship, and they passed the Enabling Act, and they made him
Yeah.
dictator for a little while. And then as dictator for a little while, he just said, well, that little while is going to be forever, and you can't stop it because I have complete dictatorial power. And
Yeah.
and I fear the same thing happening now with our government. And I never thought I would see Canada ever go this far. And it's funny, because we are on the front line of this liberty movement, and we've been pushing back against these type of overreaches.
Yeah.
But even someone who's in the heart of it and can see the agenda didn't think that we would be this far this quick, and to
Yeah.
watch it all slide away. I wanted to talk to you about that, because you and I were talking, and you said you're kind of, you're at the end of that run
Yeah.
of that public movement, and maybe you wanted to address that, and to some of your concerns as to why you feel that it's time to step back from the political side.
Well, a lot of it has to do with, I guess, my disappointment in seeing results. It's really what it comes down to. I first became actively political in 2007 when I first joined the Ontario Libertarian Party, and I met Jim McIntosh, and I met Jean-Serge Brisson, and I met Alan Small, who was relatively new at the time, and I got to know some Heath Thomas, got to know a bunch of these guys. But I also, in that very first meeting, and the way I did it, by the way, is I was cutting the grass right in the front lawn. I was listening to the radio while I'm doing this, and on the radio, of all things, there was an announcement saying there would be an Ontario Libertarian Party annual general meeting that afternoon at 2 o'clock downtown, and they provide the address. When have you ever heard that happen before? But here I am, I catch this thing. And so I finished cutting the grass. I go in and look at the internet, find out what is a libertarian, because I had no idea. And then when I read what they were all about, I thought, I think I better be down there. So I went down there and knocked on the door, and I said, hey guys, can I come in? I just heard about your group, I spent 2 hours there listening to all these guys talking about stuff that made me realize that I was a libertarian and didn't know it. So anyhow, I started reading, because I'm a real student anyhow, and I've probably read 30 books now that are libertarian or economic in nature that relate directly to this stuff, and I keep studying and studying, and my thinking evolved. So I kind of started off as being an anarcho-capitalist under the Murray Rothbard banner, and Hans Hermann Hoppe was my favorite for the longest while. But when Alan was going to run the last time, Alan Small was going to be running as a leader for the last election, which is 2018. And I was just coming off of retirement. And he's a friend of mine. I like him a lot. I always have. And so I decided that at the AGM, I decided that I was going to help. And I figured the best way for me to help is to use my 35 years of recruiting to help him put together a full slate. So I put my hand up and said, I'll be the chairman. And I got elected. And that was, and I stood up in front of the room, I remember it clearly, and saying, I have one mission, and that one mission is to help Alan Small and this Ontario Libertarian Party get a full slate, and here's why I think I can do it, etc. So I had high aspirations. To me, it was a high point to accomplish what we did. 116 candidates and 124 ridings was really knocking the ball out of the ballpark. It was really,
It's a coup for liberty. Honestly, it's huge.
yeah,
And I'm 2 years out from an election now as the leader of the party,
Right.
And I see the daunting task of trying to match your 116 alone. I,
Yeah.
I, I want a full slate and I want to move that on. And I'm telling you, that is a huge mountain to climb.
It certainly is. I know. So, after that, I stepped down largely because uh, when I first accepted the chairman's job, first of all, I didn't realize it was a 3-year term. I thought it was a 1-year term, so I was naive about it. And that's why I said in the front of the room that I was there strictly to help Alan do his thing. And I was always planning to leave the chairman's role after Alan stepped down so that, because I wanted younger people. I mean, I'm pushing 70 in a year and a half from now. So I wanted younger people to step up. I didn't want to be, and there was enough people saying that we were a bunch of old white guys, and so I didn't want to be one of the old white guys on the executive committee. I wanted to see if I could get somebody else in there. So,
Sure.
so anyhow, I stuck around for a while, but when the federal election came along, and I was planning to run for the Libertarian Party of Canada for the second time, because I've run seven elections now. Um, I was planning to do that, and my wife one day comes in and she shows me this interview. It was a YouTube interview between Maxime Bernier and Dave Rubin, and it was a long interview. And I thought, well, what the hell? I'm going to watch this thing because Cynthia was quite excited by it. And I watched it for the full hour, and at the end of it, I realized that Maxime Bernier's libertarian ideas were very similar to mine. And I also knew that before I ran with Alan, before he went for his last run, I had shifted already from being an anarcho-capitalist over to becoming a minarchist, or more like a libertarian conservative. And it was Alan who convinced me of that largely, but my reading too, because I knew that if we kept pushing the anarcho-capitalist model, and that's all we did, we're never going to get elected. I just don't see it. I've been around too long to see that as being realistic. And so I realized at that point that this was a federal party that had a leader that spoke the same language that I did. And when I read and studied quite carefully the 16 platform points, I wanted to go through them individually and ask myself, would I support each one of these independently? Is there anything that I would not support? And at the end of it, I realized that I would support all 16 of those items. I wouldn't agree with them 100%, of course, because you never do, right? But I could certainly stand up in front of an audience of people and say, I believe in these things, and I could say it from the heart, and I could promote it in good conscience, and never feel like I go to bed at night having done something or said something that wasn't right, that wasn't accurate for me. And I know we're all different. Every one of us is different. So I realize that my views are my views, and I know there are other people who don't agree with my views, and that's okay. I mean, in fact, that's one of the best things about being a libertarian, is that we are expected to be independent thinkers. We're
Fiercely
expected.
independent.
We are. I mean, and if that's not a good reason to be an independent, or to be a libertarian, I don't know what a good reason is. And so, yeah, we run into it. We have little battles with each other once in a while over ideas, but that's just because we are a feisty bunch.
Sure.
Care a lot about what we're trying to do, and occasionally we stub each other's toes. And at the end we forget about it. We move on, right? It's just the way it
That's right.
is. But what I also found too is that I'd been around the Libertarian federal and provincial for a long time, and I thought the P.P.C would be different. For some reason, I convinced myself that the P.P.C, may be a new group that were, better organized, more committed to the cause. But now looking back, since the election and seeing what's happened since, I just realized that the community of people that went to the P.P.C was no different than any other political party. You got a lot of independent people who were interested for some reasons and not for others, and it was just a hodgepodge, and that's why the organization pretty much petered out within 3 or 4 months afterwards, and that's one of the reasons why about a week ago, I guess I told them that I'm no longer going to be considered the candidate for the P.P.C in this riding, and federally, I'm not there anymore. I'm kind of losing my passion for it.
Sure.
I like following what's going on in the world out there, but what I'm disappointed by is after 7 elections, I've never broken 2% of the popular vote. And after all that time, that effort, that study, that taking heat from people, all that stuff, if that's the best I can expect, I better continue to do it.
It's not worth the energy and the effort at that point. And
Not anymore. Yeah.
people don't understand what they're giving up. But now, so the other side of that is with what we see going on now. There's
Yeah.
quite a bit of an uprising in people going, hey man, I can't even work. I'm not allowed to provide for my family now. You're
Yeah,
handing
I
out
know.
$800 tickets. So it's actually been brought to light now, and I think there's a lot of people waking up to the fact that, you know what, maybe protecting our liberty is an important thing, because we
Yeah.
aren't that far away. So it's an interesting time in the world to be at this watershed. And will the liberty movement have enough courage and stamina and strength to put out a face that is going to be acceptable to the people in the next election in
Right.
2022? Which is it's a big question to ask. And what keeps me up at night is am I qualified enough to be that face? I am the leader of the party. I have great
Right.
ideas. But I'm still a layman, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not Robert Kennedy. I'm Keith Comar, right? So
Yeah.
and I'm searching for those words, and I feel like I'm in a really deep bucket of water, but I'm going to
Yeah.
try to rise to the top and not drown. But at the same time, I feel the daunting task of trying to represent 14.5 million people in Ontario back
Yeah.
to freedom, and it's huge. So
Do you remember when I temporarily put my hand forward to be considered as the leader of the Ontario Libertarian Party? It was like
yes,
2 weeks, right?
yep,
You know what my plan was? Did I ever tell you what I was planning to do? I guess I
no,
probably didn't, did I?
no,
So I did not want to be the leader running in the next election, just so you know. What my goal was to become the leader if I was going to be elected, and then use my recruiting experience, because I've interviewed 10,000 people and done a lot of filling of jobs. Go out there and start tapping on shoulders of other people that have got what I consider the Maxime Bernier leadership qualities. You know, the background, the experience, the speaking skills, the writing skills, you name it, and try to see if I could seed the organization with a fairly ambitious person who's got more political experience than I've ever had. And then I would have bowed out, hopefully made room for him if I could, or her, if it would turn out to be a her. And I would have done that, but I would have been behind the scenes supporting that person to be as successful as possible. Because
sure,
I don't really think, we've been, as the Ontario Libertarian Party has been around for what, 45 years is it now?
yeah,
1975, the year I graduated from university. So it's a long time, and yet I don't see us as being very much further ahead than we were, 12 years ago when I first joined the party. In fact, we're a little further ahead maybe, but not a lot. But it all comes down to people and the caliber of people that make up the party, not just the leader and the deputy leader and the executive committee, because those are obviously the workhorses of the party. These are the ones who always carry the
sure,
biggest load. But fundraising comes from a large membership of committed people. Volunteering comes from a large membership and so my second goal, if I had to become leader, would have been to focus on building membership as the first and foremost goal for the period between the last election and the next election. Like, that's it, nothing else. That's all we're going to do.
sure.
And there's different ways to do it, and you've got a set of ways to do it your way, and that's great. But I was hoping that the leadership team would have identified a number of ways that could have been combined to build the membership to a much bigger level than it was, or is. I don't know what it is today, but I'm assuming when I was chairman, it was about 320, 330 members in the OLP. That's a pretty small group.
Sure it is, and
Uh,
we're just under that. It's right
yeah,
in that area. It's right in that area.
I'm
And
not.
the
People are
next
hard
thing
to.
is the next thing I think is our voting base, because
Yeah,
it's fiercely independent. They don't join parties. They'll vote for us and they understand our ideas, but they don't want to be a part of a group, and they don't
yeah,
they value themselves as individuals. So that's the next hard thing to do is to get people to actually join as a member, or to commit to
yeah,
that. You'll get people who want to run but don't want to be a part of the party. So
yeah,
it's this dichotomy
yeah,
of freedom that we're trying to put out. But my whole plan this year was to travel and to go around, but that's kind of been put
yeah.
on
It's gone.
hold by our by our government, right? And
There's Keith again. He's coming to spread the virus.
that's right, the asymptomatic carrier of the libertarian message, right?
Exactly.
So it's a hell of a battle that we face, and I'm glad to see that people are starting to wake up to the fact that rights are important, and that When you look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you should rename it.
Yeah,
It's really the Charter of Privileges and Allowances, because there are
yeah,
clauses in there that allow the government at any time to just usurp them.
yeah.
And if it's a right, it's inviolable. You can't take it from me.
Right.
If it's a privilege, it can be removed. So let's address it as to what it is. And these are bigger conversations that are starting to come out, and people are starting to wake up to that. So hopefully we'll get some traction out of this at the back end.
It's funny, Keith, that you're talking in the same way that I used to talk, in that I'm interested in ideas. And so I want to debate ideas and discuss ideas, and you're doing the same thing.
Yes.
And I used to be told there's a guy named Rob Brooks who worked very closely a number of years ago with Alan. And he was always disappointed in me because I wasn't the politician who was trying to get elected to go to Queen's Park. I was the guy who was trying to spread the word, to get people thinking about things like the Constitution and why it's important. And in other words, I saw myself more like a teacher,
Yes.
almost like an apostle, trying to spread the word and get people to think along the lines of freedom, liberty, and what a government can do with that kind of ideological framework. And so, he eventually left the party because we never really went much further. But at the same time, if you're going to focus on ideas, you may run into the same problem that I ran into. That a lot of people are going to say, yeah, forget the ideas. We just need you to get votes. It's going to be, you'll get heat from that, because I know I did, and I
I
think Alan
do.
did too.
I
Yeah,
do. But as you were a younger man, and me being that younger man, I'm passionate. And I
yeah,
understand that unless you can feed as many fish as you want, but if you're not teaching people how to fish, they're going to
yeah.
starve eventually.
I
So
agree.
to have that solid liberty movement, if it's going to take 100 years, I don't care. If it's
Yeah,
one person at a time, it's one mind at a time, it's one
yeah,
conversation at a time, and you see light bulbs flip off on those people. But the ones that you do convert become
yeah,
lifetime libertarians, because they understand the concepts and they understand the
yeah,
root of what you're speaking at, and you've
yeah,
also reached out to that core. So as slow as it is, and as much heat as we take for that, I still
yeah.
believe it is the right approach, Gene.
No, I think you're doing the right thing, absolutely. Because in my mind, if a slogan can get a guy to join a party without him thinking much beyond the slogan, then another guy can come around the corner tomorrow with a different slogan, and he'll leave and go to that guy's party. But
That's
if
right.
you get somebody understanding the foundation of libertarianism, what it really means, because they understand it in their heart and their soul, they won't go away. There's no way they're going to go away, because there's only one, liberty ideology that really makes any sense whatsoever, and that's libertarianism.
We'll get there, Gene. We're going to get there, and I know, and it might actually go the other way first, but
Yeah,
eventually people have had enough of that, and eventually the true Canadian spirit that we have in our hearts
yeah,
of freedom will come out, and it might take a generation,
yeah,
but eventually people will stand up, and they
yeah,
won't accept this as their future, because we are free in our hearts, and our blood runs true with that type of
yeah.
mentality. So we'll get there.
I think you and I had a really brief conversation about me. I was thinking about running as an independent next time,
Yeah.
in the provincial election, and I think I'd like to talk about that for a minute, just to explain to you and to other people who might be looking at this what I had in my mind at the time, and what I might still do. Um, and that is, I'm a big fan of the Swiss system of government. And the
Yes.
Swiss system of government is really decentralized. They have 26 cantons, and each one has its own government, and all public services are run out of each canton independently. So you can almost imagine it as if Ontario was divided into 20 regions, and they all had roughly the same size of population, and they all ran their own government, so they ran their own schools, their own healthcare, and everything else. They might do it in a coordinated way with other cantons, because you could still negotiate terms with an adjacent canton, but in that way, the services and the government would be very close to the people they serve. They wouldn't be 18 layers of organization away from the people they serve. And anytime, if you and I try to contact anybody in the Ontario government today, try to get them through email, through phone calls, there'd be 18 layers between us and them. You can't get them. They're not going to talk to you at all, other
That's
than
right.
when it's an election time. But one guy I interviewed, I was doing some recruiting in Europe a while back, and I interviewed this one guy in Switzerland, and I was curious. I said, so tell me what it's like, and we talked a bit about his government. And he said, Gene, if I've got an issue and I'm having a beer with my friend and we're talking about this issue, but we don't know what the government plans to do about it, he said, I can finish my beer, walk across the road, walk into the government office and sit down with my local representative and have a conversation with him. And I thought, man, can you imagine what that would be like to be able to do that? So I was thinking that I was using my imagination thinking, what if in the province of Ontario, there was an independent candidate running in every one of the 124 ridings. They were all pro-liberty candidates, every one of them. They all thought like you and I. The only people they're accountable to are their own local constituents in their own riding. Right now, all ridings are roughly 100,000 people. So the only people they're accounting to are those 100,000 people. So let's imagine they all got elected, every one of them. So they go to Queen's Park. There's not a single name political party on any bench in Queen's Park. There's 124 independents who are there strictly to serve their constituents.
Right.
From there, of course, they have to be coordinated. So they would have to do what Switzerland did. Switzerland put together an executive committee that deals with national issues, which I guess we would call regional if you want to call it Ontario. Yep. And each one of these guys are elected for a 6-year term, and they rotate through 6 different portfolios. So they're getting a well-rounded understanding of what the nation needs, and all 26 cantons report into this group for anything that has to do with, governance outside of the jurisdiction of their immediate community. And in that way, you'd end up with essentially a Swiss system. You'd have. And by the way, the only taxation that's possible in that country is taxation within the canton. You cannot issue a national tax, other than the VAT tax. I think the VAT tax is actually something that could be national.
And they also fund their military from the cantons. And what happens is the federal government puts out a notice to the cantons saying we need this much and this much and this much. The people vote on that and say yes, we will accept that, and then the cantons fund that federal. So there is no taxation at that layer.
That's true democracy.
You bet it is.
Really accountable true democracy. And that's what I see as a vision. So I was hoping to be an independent and try to get other people along the same lines to consider it so that we wouldn't have to be so worrying about the province from a province point of view, from a big picture point of view, but we could actually focus on where the rubber meets the road, which is the people we serve in our local communities. Anyhow, it's a dream.
And you know what? It's funny you say that, because I'll tell you, back in 2015, if you look on my Facebook page, there's a group I started called Elect an Independent. It was a federal movement. I wanted to start everybody. I wanted to elect more than 50% independents across the country, so the government couldn't be formed without us, that the independents would now form a coalition of independents. We would be able to reform government. We would be able to introduce recall legislation. We'd be able to reduce the transfers and reduce the payments to federal government. And because we were independent, there would be no party interference. There'd be no conversation. We could look after each region. So I've been on that page for a long time with you. But now, as the Ontario Libertarian Party leader, what I want to introduce this time around is a more of a decentralized platform where we focus on community-based solutions. The centralized platform will be to repeal as much as we can and put the power back in the hands of the municipality, get rid of the OMB, get rid of all of these, the conservation authority, all of these overbearing steps, and then let each candidate in each riding say, well, you know what, this is what we need in our area. You can now present that to me, and I can see what type of legislation I can remove as the provincial government to do that. So it's the closest thing in my mind to representing that elect an independent idea that I had within a political party, because I really still believe at the end of the day that the mindset of the people is you have to have that. They have that tribal team mentality. Yeah. So I love your idea, and I'm there, and I believe that honestly that is the best way to go, is to have 124 independents representing each riding, to shrink the size and scope of the provincial government and allow the municipalities to self-govern and be self-reliant on themselves. Because your problems in Kawartha Lakes are not the same problems in Toronto, and they certainly aren't the problems that Kenora has. And to represent those people properly, you need to have somebody with a local idea. And you will never get a bridge built in Kenora because Toronto needs the bridge, because that's where the voting base is. And
That's right.
if you're a party-based politician, you're going to focus on where you get the most bang for your buck. If I can spend $1 billion in Toronto and get 3 million votes, or I can spend that same $1 billion up in Sudbury and get 50,000 votes, where the hell do you think I'm going to spend that money as a politician,
That's
right?
right.
And it's all about protecting their own mindset in their own head. So I'm there
Yeah.
with you, and we're all trying our best to do that, because I think the Swiss have the best model, and they have for 130 years now. They passed their constitution back in the 1870s. So this isn't a new idea of the
No,
cantons. This is an old, tried, tested, and true solution to this problem.
they consolidated or defined it at 150 years ago, but
They
for
defined it in
200 years
1878 was
it
was
was.
their,
Eh?
their constitution. But yes, they've used that
Nice.
model for a long time. But it was
Yeah.
finally written into law as their constitution in the 1870s. So, but yes,
Yeah.
it's
Cool.
and anybody who studies that model, we always talk about how the Swiss, they're always neutral in the wars.
Oh
They
yeah.
always have the money. The money always circulates through the Swiss bank accounts because they're free and independent. Well, there's a reason that
Yeah.
Switzerland is ahead of the game, and it's because they're the freest country and they have the most liberty.
Yeah. I agree. The other thing that's interesting about them is that there's a rating for national happiness around the world. You've probably seen that rating.
Yes.
They're always in the top 5. There's a rating for the top per capita income. They're always in the top 5. So here's a nation, that the people are happy, the people are wealthy, and they're all decentralized with a lot more democracy than anybody else. It's kind of interesting, and I don't know why more people don't observe that, pay attention, and realize that maybe the Swiss is a model that they should be studying. You and I are doing it, but that's because we've been involved politically for a while, and we
That's right.
care about looking for alternatives. But the average person on the street, they're getting their news typically from CBC or CFTO or whatever's left out there,
Sure.
because I don't usually want. You know what I do at around 6 o'clock at night? My wife still likes to watch the news. I can't stand watching the news. I have to get up out of the room and go into another room and read a book or something. I just can't watch it anymore.
I can handle maybe 4 minute, 5 minute news clips because I still want to hear what they're saying, but
Yeah,
I can't sit through a 30-minute broadcast and absorb that type of you know programming.
I can't either. Yeah,
And then the word itself is used on purpose. It is programming. It's
yeah,
it's 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 done to send you a certain message. And it's funny how you always hear about how Sweden is such a wonderful country until they didn't lock down for Corona, and now they're not so wonderful all of a sudden. The left has lost their love for Sweden because they didn't
yeah,
run and hide from this virus. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to see when the data finally comes out, we're going to realize that this is just a huge mistake that we've done, and the
the
economic damage that we cause is really going
yes.
to outweigh anything that this virus could have ever done.
Well, the data is out as of yesterday. These 2 guys I was telling you about earlier, you got to see
Yes,
this YouTube video. When you see the data that they're talking about, the data is officially out. And if
50 to
I sent a note,
85 times it has spread more than the numbers show. 50 to 85 times the spread. And so if you have a 3% death rate and you divide that by 85, you're down at 0.00 something,
yeah. Well,
right?
these guys went through, this is 50 minutes long, and these 2 doctors went through, I think it was about 4 different nations. So they looked at their own data in California first, and then they started comparing it to New York City, to Sweden, to Norway. Who else did they compare to? Oh, to Spain as well. And when they did their analysis and presented to you, they stated that the flu death rate is 1.3% worldwide. These ones, if you looked at their results, the highest death rate from COVID was 1%, and the lowest was 0.03%. And that's the range they're dealing with now. It's definitely under 1% and definitely under the flu rate. Definitely.
And it is very focused on elderly with comorbidities. If
That's right.
a healthy man like yourself who looks after himself,
Yeah.
you aren't even at threat to this virus, and you're pushing 70 now. Where
Yeah.
if you're obese and you smoke and you have heart problems, you should
Yeah.
hide because this is going to take you out, and we understand that. And
Yeah.
if you look at Ontario, it's so terrible to see that we failed our elderly because everybody's locked down, and yet this is running through our care homes like wildfire. So
Yeah.
where has locking down done any good for any of these people? Right? It hasn't done a
Yeah.
damn thing to help them.
Well,
And
I
and
think it,
and
I think it's actually a little bit too late. That's the thing, is that doctor that played hockey with Mark, I was telling you about, he was in there in the Pinecrest before he even knew it was a COVID virus. He didn't know that there was a pandemic on his hands. He had no idea. So he was in there treating people for symptoms. And a few days later is when they began to identify that this was killing people. And then the news came out. So by that time, the virus had spread throughout the entire place in Pinecrest and in Bowcajun. And once it's spread, you can't pull it out of their bodies. It's just there, you know.
That's right.
They ended up with a death rate of something like 29 people. I'm sorry, Cynthia? Yeah, half of them, half of their 65 residents were infected by it. Wow. And a lot of them were, one lady I saw was 94. Yeah, the one lady was 94 that died. Another was 80, a man was 84 that died. One of them had dementia. I heard about one child who was 9 years of age who died in another place, but he had leukemia. Right, so the news broadcast said, "Oh, there's a 9-year-old boy that died of, but didn't explain it." Then you find out a couple days later, the boy had leukemia. Like, no wonder he died,
Well, sure, and that's not part of the conversation because it doesn't generate the fear to pass these legislations, exactly. And that's what people need to be looking at in all of this. Is you need to understand that yes, this is a virus, and yes, it's around, but there's credible data and there's credible information for you to protect yourself. Yep. If you're willing to open your eyes and open your ears and listen to what's going on.
Yep.
But then you have to understand or ask the question of yourself, why aren't they telling me the truth? Why are they only telling me half truths? And what is the agenda at the end of the day for the purpose of the half truth, right? And I don't want to say that Doug Ford was out there rubbing his hands together looking for a virus, but now that it's here, why would you waste it? Yep. Alberta passed Bill 10. I've never seen legislation so egregious in my whole entire life, Gene. I don't know if you know what Bill 10 is. Bill 10 is an act that the health minister of Alberta can now, at any time, for any reason, declare an epidemic and come right into your home and say, you are a carrier, you're leaving the house. We can walk into your house now and take you out.
Wow.
That passed. And of course, 48 hours from the time they introduced it, read it, shoved it through, they've got a majority. Now's the time, there's a pandemic on here, let's use this. So Alberta now has probably some of the most draconian legislation I've ever seen, and it's sitting there waiting for them to implement it at any moment. So
that's a conservative government. That surprises me.
That is a conservative government.
I would not have expected that. He's not the kind of guy that I thought would have seen that pass.
That's something for you to read after. You've given me a meme or a Facebook to watch. Go research Bill 10, and you will your heart will break, Gene, when you read this legislation, because there's a list of like 13 things that he's now allowed to do as the health, not even the premier, the health minister is now the most powerful person in Alberta, and it's like, wow, we have had freedoms. I thought we had freedoms. Well, apparently no, we had privileges, and they're gone. So what's going to happen in the future is a scary thought. And for me to have a 21-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter who are going to grow into this, I fear terribly for them. And I don't ever want them to look at me and say, Dad, you didn't try. You didn't do enough.
I used to say to my kids.
Right. And so that's where my fight is. And it's funny that we talk like this, because I'm like 20 years behind you on that list, right? I got the younger kids, and I'm fighting because I don't want to see them going into this horrible type of communist, fascist country that we're living in. Gene, we're at 48 minutes. I should probably wrap this up. It's great to interview, and I'll gladly do this more and more, but we'll have to break it into pieces. But I really do appreciate the call, and your knowledge on liberty is unsurpassed. People out there, find Gene Balfour on Facebook. Have a look at some of the stuff he's written. I'm coaxing him into putting some stuff on my website, Libertarianworld.ca. It's still, it's in its infancy, but I want as much liberty news on there as I can, and I can think of a guy with more knowledge in this area than you. So please, please come back. Be safe with the family out there, and we will talk again, Gene.
Thanks very much, and the same to you too, Keith. All the best.
Yes.
Okay, take care.
Thank you for watching today. Hit the like and subscribe button below, and follow me at Patreon /Libertarian World to help us fund the show.